Hello, anybody on the line? We will be getting started shortly. We're just going to allow everybody a little time to join the room today. So thanks for joining us. Katie, you let me know when you want to get started, okay?
You can go ahead and get started. It's 3.
Okay. All right. Thank you to everyone that has joined us today. Welcome to today's webinar. The title of the webinar is Error Rate Training for Year 3 States, Successfully Completing Reviews and the ACF-404 Report, your error rate report. First, some introductions. You have your 3 error rate specialists here today representing the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability. My name is Mike McKenzie. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin. I'm the error rate specialist for Region 1. I'm also a program integrity subject matter expert at the Subsidy Center. Janae Williams is the error rate specialist for Region 7. Janae is from Louisiana, and she is also the program integrity team lead at NICSIA. And last but not least, we have Katie Watts, our error rate lead. She provides support to regions 2 through 6 and 8 through 10. Katie is from Maryland, and again, she knows everything about error rates, so we're glad to have her with us today. Want to recognize our federal partners as well. We have Adi Fatur and Linda Winings from the from the Oversight and Accountability Division. They're both child care specialists in the central office. And we also have some regional office staff that are joining us as well. So welcome to all our federal partners. All right, let's quickly review today's agenda. We're going to start with how you get started with the Online Data Collection System, or OLDC. We will also talk about how to correctly complete the ACF-404 report. We'll talk about next steps for Year 3 states, and we'll have plenty of opportunity for questions. If you have a question, we encourage you to go ahead and enter that in the chat box. We'll try and get to it today. If we don't, we'll follow up and make sure that we get to answer all of your questions. All right, this is the timeline for Year 3 states. As you can see, the case review period has been completed. You've already submitted your SDAP and your record review worksheets for approval. Next now is to submit your state improper payments report, or that 404 report. That is due June 30th of this year. If your error rate is above a certain amount, then you'll also have a corrective action plan that will be due. That will be due 60 days after the deadline for submitting your ACF-404. And you'll receive communication from the regional office if that's the case. That's fine, Katie, thank you. Lastly, before I turn this over to one of our other error rate specialists, just want to remind you that we have lots of acronyms. You probably know most of these. I'm not going to go through this list right now, but we just wanted you to have this as a reference in case you're not familiar with some of these acronyms. All right, and with that, I am going to turn it over to Janae Williams to take you through how to get started and how to utilize the Online Data Collection System, or OLDC. Janae?
Thank you, Mike. Awesome. So many of you will be working on the 404 report in the OLDC, likely have already had or have at least some experience in the site, either with previous cycles or entering or submitting the SDAP this cycle. So some of this will be a review for you, but if you're new to the OLDC, you'll need to request access. There is a form to be completed, which Katie sent out before the webinar, or you can get it from the handouts in the dashboard. You will return the completed form to your air rate specialist, copying the regional office. Multiple people can have access to the report. In fact, we recommend that more than one person in your state has the ability to at least enter data. So if one person with access happens to be out for the day, someone else can get into the report. Okay, so here is the website for the OLDC. And a couple of things to note for logging in. First, two-factor authentication may be required. Some people seem to get asked to do it, and others do not. The two-factor authentication involves an extra step after you enter your password. Either they text you or call you with a number that you then enter, or you can use the Google Authenticator app. Also, this is something that is newer. Some people are asked to log in through login.gov, and this involves setting up a separate username and password than the usual one for the use of OLDC. Now, if you're asked to do this and have any trouble, you can reach out to us for technical assistance. And one final thing, we recommend you try logging on before June 30th, just to make sure you're able to get in okay and everything looks right once you're into the system. All right. Now, once you've successfully logged into the OLDC, you'll see an application launch page, which looks like this screenshot. You will click on OLDC, which is here in the top right corner. Then a new page will open, which is the OLDC homepage. There are actually two versions of this. It defaults to the regular, which is the one on the left, but you can choose to switch to the enhanced homepage, which is the one you see on the right. There really isn't any significant difference between the two. The enhanced version has a few different capabilities on this home screen, such as being able to view your most recent activity, but that's it. And the differences are limited to this home screen. So once you've clicked on the link and leave this page, there's no differences in any of the other pages on the OLDC. Okay, so regardless of whether you're looking at the regular or the enhanced homepage, you will see a list of links on the left side of the screen. You're going to want to click on the top link, which is the report entry form, and then you will leave to the home page and be taken to the form selection page. The form selection page, as you can see, has a series of drop-down items. And on the next page, I'll show you what to do for those. All right, so the first step on the form selection page is to select your program. Where it says program name, you will choose Child Care Development Fund Mandatory and Matching. On this screenshot, there is only one option in the dropdown, but depending on your OLDC access capabilities, you may see additional options. Next, you will select the grantee name. Here you can see I have a lot of options, but you will probably only see your state's name pop up. In some states, there are more than one grantee. You can see in this picture that there are two grantees for Alaska. So if that is the case for your state, you will want to contact your regional office for assistance in determining which is the correct grantee. Don't guess, because we don't want you to enter in all of your data under the wrong grantee and then have to go back and re-enter everything under the correct one. Now, once you've chosen the grantee, step 3 is to select the report. And again, this is a drop down. You might see more options depending on your role in OLDC, but regardless, you'll want to pick Program Performance Form ACF-404. Now, once you've selected the ACF-404 report, then this box will pop up. This shows a list of review periods. These represent the case review periods, which for your cohort ran from 2020 to 2021. So to start the report, you will refer to the line for 10/1/2020 to 9/30/2021 and click the plus sign that you see here. You can also see on this page that the state's 404 reports from, you can also see on this page the state's 404 reports from prior reporting periods. These are also available for viewing if you'd like. Now, when you've started your 404 report and saved it, when you come back into the OLDC, this is what the box will look like. So to get back in and edit, you'll want to click this icon that looks like a square with a pencil on it. And also you can see that there are other icons here. The first allows you to see the report status and history. The icon in the middle is to generate a printable version of the latest saved version of the report. And the icon on the right is just to view the latest version. All right, so some general tips for using OLDC. So first, it's always an excellent ideal to save your work often. Your work is not saved automatically, and we all know that computers freeze up and or occasionally crash. So we don't want you to get far along and then lose everything. Copy and paste. Every year, this is a bit of a mystery to us because some users are able to copy and paste their work just fine and others cannot. So at any rate, we do recommend that you complete the report first in Word document, just so that you have a backup version, and hopefully, fingers crossed, you can copy and paste it into the OLDC. Now, before you're able to submit your report, you will need to click a button that says Validate. We'll show you this later on in the webinar, but when you validate, you'll get a list of issues with your report, if there are any. Some of these are considered warnings, which should be read and addressed if necessary, but the report can still be submitted with the warnings. If there are any errors, however, these must be fixed before submission, okay? So once you have submitted it, you need to make any changes the designee will need to uncertify and unsubmit the report, and that can be done from the report status page, which can be accessed from the box I showed you on the last screen. And if we can go back to the last screen real quickly. Perfect. Awesome. So are there any questions on accessing and getting started with OLDC?
I don't see any questions that have come in, Janae, so thank you for walking through all of that.
No problem. Thank you, Katie.
All right. So let's move on to the next part of the webinar, which is going through each of the parts and items of the ACF-404 report, and we'll discuss how they're completed and how they will be entered into the OLDC. So first, to introduce the report to you, again, some of this will probably be review for some of you if you've been involved in prior cycles, but if you are new or if you need a refresher, the 404 report consists of 3 parts. First is the program assurances and certifications. Part 2 consists of the error measures, which are the numbers or the quantitative measures. And then finally, part 3 includes a number of narrative items. So to start our walkthrough of the 404, we'll start at part 1, which is assurances and certifications. This is a screenshot from the ACF-404 template, which can, of course, be found in the DCI data collection instructions. I also sent out a copy of the 404 report template on its own before the webinar. It can also be found in the handouts box. But this is just pulled from that template. I'm not going to read through the certifications, but what you need to know right now is that in the OLDC, the fields that you're seeing on the bottom will be pre-populated for you. The certifier will just have to click on a link to e-sign. And even though this is part one of the report, the certification that e-signing actually is the last thing you do before submission after everything has been entered and verified. Also, sometimes you might run into this where you notice that some of the fields here, like your email address, might not actually pre-populate for you. And if that happens, don't worry, we do still have all your information. You know, as long as the basics are there, your name, you know, state, that kind of thing is on there, then that's perfectly fine. So part one is pretty straightforward. So we can move on to part two, which is, again, the error measures, those quantitative measures. And before we dive into the items that form part two of the 404 report, I'm going to take a step back and show you one of the elements in the record review worksheet. This is element 500. If you've been conducting reviews, this will probably look familiar to you. If you're not familiar with the record review worksheet, here's a quick crash course. So for each of the case records that are completed, each of the case reviews that are completed, the reviewer enters their findings into element 500, column 2 of a record review worksheet, and that's what's shown here. In item 1, the reviewer records whether the case had any error in it. In item 2, they record whether the error, if any, was caused by missing or insufficient documentation. Items 2A through 2E I'm not going to go to in a lot of detail here, but these items ask for some additional information about those missing or insufficient documentation errors and whether they were able to be mitigated through an additional inquiry. Item 3, this is where the reviewer records whether an error, if there is one, resulted in an underpayment or an overpayment. Item 4 is the amount of the improper payment, if there is one. And item 5 is the total payment amount for the sample month. So the reason I'm showing this to you is because the information that is entered in column 2 of element 500 here for each of the worksheets forms the basis for many of the items that you will be computing for part 2. So you'll be reviewing and tallying up a lot of the figures that you've entered here. So when I'm walking through the different items in the next few slides, I'll be referencing these element 500 items a lot. Also, one of the other handouts that I sent out earlier today is a copy of the record review worksheet. So if you want to kind of, I don't know, have that open or next to you, if it's helpful to refer back to these 500 items, you can certainly do that. All right, so let's start at the beginning of the items in the 404 report part 2. As I go through, I'll use a hypothetical state for example numbers. Starting with item 1, this is the total number of cases reviewed, which in our example state, and I think in all of the year 3 states on this call, is going to be 276 cases reviewed. Item 2 is asking for the total number of cases with an error, and this includes any error and not just those that caused an improper payment. To determine this figure, you'll need to refer to your completed record review worksheets and tally up the total number of cases that had a 1 entered for element 500, column 2, number 1. And we'll say that our state had 45 cases with an error. Item 3 is the percentage of cases with an error. And you can see here at the bottom of the screen, I've given the formula to determine this. It's item 2 divided by item 1 multiplied by 100 to get a percentage. You don't actually have to do this math because the item is auto-calculated in the OLDC, but if you want to double check it, there's the formula. So in our example state, the percentage of cases with an error was 16.3%. And I'm actually going to quick show you what this looks like in the OLDC so you can see how the auto calculation works. Just again, if you want to double check things. So this is how the 404 report is going to look when you're entering it into the OLDC. It does look pretty similar to the template. I'm going to highlight just these first 3 items. These are what we just looked at on the slides. But just to show you how to do the auto calculating, for the item 1, I'm going to enter 276 for the number of cases. For total number of cases with an error, we'll say 20. And then you can see in item 3 here that you can't enter anything. In order for the calculation, you need to, in order to get the calculation, you'll need to go up to the top and click Save. Let me just quick show you that. And then you can see here that that auto calculation was completed. Right. So again, you have to hit Save to actually see the completed item for any of these items that have the auto calculation. Okay. Item 4 in the ACF-404 asks for the total number of cases with an improper payment. This is the total number of cases with a number other than 0 entered in your record review worksheet, element 500, column 2, number 4. So number 4, if you recall looking at the element 500 a few slides back, that's where the improper payment amount is captured. So if that amount is anything other than 0, then that case would be included in this tally. One note is that this tally should not include any potential improper payment caused by missing or insufficient documentation that were mitigated through an additional inquiry. So if you had any of those and the case did not have any other improper payments, those would not be included in this count. Our state had 20 cases with an improper payment. Item 5 asks for the percentage of cases with an improper payment, which is determined by dividing the number of cases with an improper payment by the total number of cases. That's item 4 divided by item 1. This is another item that is auto-calculated in the OLDC, so you don't actually have to do this math. Our state's percentage of cases with an improper payment was 7.25%. And item 6 asks for the total number of cases with an improper payment error due to missing or insufficient documentation, or MID, to use the acronym that we often use there. And similar to item 4, we do want you to ensure that you are only including those improper payment errors that remained after any mitigation through the additional inquiry. Here you'll tally up the number of cases that had a Y entered for element 500, column 2, number 2 of the record review worksheets, and that also had a number other than 0 in item 4 of element 500, column 2. So in our example state, we'll say that there were 8 cases with an improper payment error due to missing or insufficient documentation. Items 7, 8, and 9 in the 404 ask for some additional information about missing or insufficient documentation errors. 7A asks for the total number of MID potential payment errors. And something to point out here is that this is different from the last few items in that it's not asking for the number of cases that had an error, but what is the number of errors. So a case can sometimes have more than one error in it. So this should include all of those MID potential improper payment errors including those that were mitigated and those that were not. The figure that you enter here can be found by summing the figures in your record review worksheets, element 500, column 2, item 2A. And we'll say that our example state had 13 mid-potential improper payment errors. (7B) asks for the sum of the potential improper payments resulting from mid-errors. So this is the dollar figure before any additional inquiry mitigation. And it's the sum of the figures recorded in element 500, column 2, 2B of the record review worksheet. You would apply the pooling factor here if pooled funds were used. Our state identified $3,440 in potential improper payments from the mid-errors. And you'll notice here, and in all of the items throughout that ask for dollar amounts, everything is rounded to the nearest dollar. So when working in the OLDC, if you try and enter dollars and cents, they'll be automatically rounded. So item 7 in the last slide is asking about all of the mid-errors, whether they were mitigated or not. Item 8A is now asking for the total number of mid-errors that were mitigated using an additional inquiry. And this can be found by summing element 500, column 2, item 2D in your record review worksheet. And we'll say that in our example, there were 5 mid-potential improper payment errors that were mitigated. 8B is the total dollar amounts that were mitigated. And to get this, you would total up the figures that you recorded in element 500, column 2, item 2E of your record review worksheet. Similarly to item 7B in the last slide, you will want to apply the pooling factor here if pooled funds were used. And in our example, the state had $1,320 of payments mitigated. Moving to 9A, this is asking for the total number of mid-errors resulting in an improper payment that cannot be mitigated. And this is actually just 7A minus 8A, and it's going to be calculated for you automatically. So for 7A, we had 13 potential mid-improper payment errors, and 5 were mitigated, so we're left with 8 here for 9A. 9B asks for the total dollar amount of mid-improper payments that could not be mitigated. And as you may have guessed, this is 7B minus 8B, as I have on here. And also, as you may have guessed, it is calculated for you in the OLDC. We have $2,120 for our state. So at this point in the state improper payment report, we're going to move away from the mid items and back to thinking about all of the case review findings. Item 10 asks for the total amount of payments for the sampled cases. And this can be found by summing the amounts that were entered in element 500, column 2, number 5 of the record review worksheet. And you will apply the pooling factor here, if applicable. We'll say that our state had $124,850 in payments for their sampled cases. Item 11 asks for the total amount of improper payments for the review period. This is the gross amount of underpayments and overpayments. This can be found by summing up the amounts entered in element 500, column 2, number 4 of your record review worksheet. And this is calculated automatically by summing up or by adding together the totals for the next 2 items, 11A and 11B. So as you can see, 11A asks just for the total amount of underpayments that were found in the review period. And you can find this by summing the amounts in element 500, column 2, number 4 of the record review worksheet for those cases that also have a U entered in element 500, column 2, number 3. Apply the pooling factor here, if applicable. Our example state had $710 in underpayments. And in 11B, you'll do the same thing that you did in 11A, but this time just for overpayments. Sum the amounts entered in element 500, column 2, number 4 of your record review worksheets for only those that had an O entered for element 500, column 2, number 3. Again, apply the pooling factor if pooled funds were used. In the example state, we have $4,590 in overpayments. And then again, item 11 is auto-calculated by adding these two figures together. So we get to $5,300 in total total improper payments, underpayments and overpayments together. All right, next we have a couple of items that again are going to be auto-calculated. Item 12 is the percentage of the total amount of payments for the sampled cases that are improper payments. And this is what we refer to as your state's error rate. And it's calculated by dividing item 11, which we just looked at. That's your total amount of improper payments. This is divided by item 10, which was your total amount of payments for all the sampled cases. And again, this is calculated for you in the OLDC, and we have 4.25% here. Item 13 asks for the average amount of improper payments. And if you want to look at the math for this one, this is dividing item 11, which again is all of your improper payments, by item 4 of the 404 report. Item 4 is the number of cases that had an improper payment. So this is to get an average. And this, again, is also done for you in the OLDC automatically. So we're going to say that the example state had an average amount of improper payments of $265. Moving on to 14A, this is your total amount of subsidy payments made using CCDF funds over the 12-month review period. And the important thing to note here is that this includes all children, not just those sampled cases. So this will be a large number. We're going to say 54,250,320 for our state. And then 14D is the estimated annual amount of improper payments. This is applying that error rate that was just calculated in item 12. This is applying that error rate to the figure that was just entered in 14A. So item 12 multiplied by 14A, it's done for you in the OLDC. And that math works out to $2,305,638. Right, a few more items in part 2 of the 404 report. This has a lot, I know there's a lot of words here, so I'm going to break it down. This is asking about the pooling factor. I'm not going to read through every single thing here, but basically you'll have to check either A, B, or C here. If your review was not based on a sample drawn from pooled funds, and this is something that you talked about in your SDAP, so you might want to go back and refer to that, how you determine whether a pooling factor is used or not. But if you know that your review was not drawn from pooled funds, then you would just check A and then move on to 16. You don't need to do anything else here. If your review was based on a sample drawn from pooled funds, and you applied the pooling factor from your most recent ACF 800 reporting form, then you would check B. And you would also have to provide the number and percentage of cases that used pooled funds. In most cases, we found it's going to be all of the sampled cases and the percentage is 100, but not always. There's always a couple of states that find that the pooling factor was not applied to all of the sampled cases. So if that's the case, then we would need you to also complete B3, which asks you to describe which case used it and why. And then once you've done that, you can then move on to 16. If you used a pooling factor that was different from the one that you gave on the most recent ACF 800 reporting form, then you would check C and answer these 5 items. Let us know what your pooling factor is, how you came up with it, give the number and percentage of sampled cases using pooled funds, and again, if all of the sampled cases did not use the pooling factor, describe in C5, that last item. And again, I know the pooling factor sometimes trips up some people. I know it trips up me all the time. If you have any doubts, any questions, please reach out for technical assistance. We'll be happy to help with that. All right, item 16 asks for some information on any replacement cases that were used. As a reminder, you must have received approval from the regional office to use any replacement cases. For the sake of space, I'm only showing 2 months from the template here, October and November. But to show an example, we'll say that our state had 1 replacement case in October, well, actually we'll say 2, had 2 replacement cases in October because it was discovered that no payment was actually made in the sample month. And again, this reason was used 2 times. Now, when you are in the OLDC, there's a space to record the month the replacement case was used, the reason, and the number of times that reason was used in that month. There's a list of reasons pre-populated, and if yours is not on there, you can select other and then write in the comments. And let me show you what I'm talking about. So again, I'm going into the OLDC. And I've scrolled down to item 16. And this is how that item is set up. So like in the example, we'll say that the month of the replacement case was October. Here are the pre-populated reasons: natural disaster, fraud, or appeal. We're going to say other. And if that reason, again, if you say other, you can write down what that reason is. No payment made in sample month. And the number of times that reason was used in the month is 2. If the reason for your replacement case is natural disaster, fraud, or appeal, then you can just select that and you do not have to write anything additional in the other comments. If you have another month that used a replacement case or additional reasons within a month, then you can click add here to add a row. If you need to delete a row, then you can check this box and check delete marked rows. If you need to add multiple rows, you can do that as well here. You can see on the drop down. So that takes us to the end of part 2 of the State Improper Payments report, the 404 report. I do see one question that came in. Let's see. This is a good question. It's from Alyssa or Lisa Pullen. Is a corrective action plan based on 10%? Is that based on the percentage in item 3 or item 5? So if you have an error rate above 10%, that is when you need to complete a corrective action plan. And what you're asking is, what item of the 404 is that based on? And you're saying, is that 3 or 5? It's actually item 12, I think. You go back. It's actually not 3 or 5, it's item 12, which is the percentage of the total amount of payments for the sampled cases that are improper payments. So the error rate is calculated based on dollars and not on number of cases. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, one more question that came in from Melody Olson for 14A. Are we to pull out any CRRSA funds that were used? So this is a question about what to include in that total amount of subsidy payments made using CCDF funds. And I'm actually going to hand this question. I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure I'm 100% right. So I'm going to ask my friends at the OCC Central Office to answer that for us.
Sure. Hi, Katie. This is Adi. Hi, everybody. So yes, HRSA funds are considered CCDF funds. So if those were funds you used for subsidy payments, those would be included in this report. That's a great question.
Thanks, Adi. And that's what I was going to say for the record, but I just wanted to be 100% sure. All right. Seeing no more questions come in, we'll move on. Let me just skip forward to where I left off. And we will stop again for questions at least one more time. So sorry, just saw one more question come in. I'm going to quick address this before I move on from LaQuisha Child. If you select other for the replacement case reason, do you fill in the comment section? Let's see. Yes. So I'm pulling up the replacement case example on the OLDC again. And yes, if it's not one of these reasons, you select other here from the drop down, and then you can just type in what that reason is. So for example, no payment made. Right. So let's go on to part 3, narrative responses. All right, so the first of the narrative items, 17, asks the following. Describe lessons learned or improvements made in implementation of the review process during the current review cycle. So here we don't want you to repeat the plans that you gave us in the SDAP or sampling decisions plan, but some of the things you can do here, you can describe what you learned as you implemented the SDAP. What did you do this cycle that was different from prior cycles? Did anything change in the middle of the cycle as a result of things you learned? Was there anything that was unexpected? Improvements made, and so on. In item 18, you'll be providing some information about the potential improper payment errors due to missing or insufficient documentation. And you must provide all this information for each of the potential improper payment errors that were due to MID, regardless of whether an additional inquiry was used and regardless of whether the error was mitigated. So there is a lot going on in this item. There's sub-items A through F. But the good news is that everything can be easily pulled from your MID tables. And I'm going to show you some examples of this on the next slide. I'll go through each of these, A through F. But first, I want to draw your attention to the yellow box here on the bottom right corner of the screen. Please, 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 we're begging you to double check to make sure that all of your potential improper payment errors are included here. The number of lines that you enter in item 18, and I'll show you in the next slide, it's like a table format. So the number of rows should equal whatever figure that was entered back in item 7A. 7A is where we asked for your total number of potential improper payment errors. So each of those, whatever number you entered in 7A, that's going to be the number of rows here. Also, the number of lines where you say you mitigated the error must equal the figure that you entered in 8A, and the number of lines where you say you did not mitigate the error must equal what you entered in 9A. So again, please just double check this before you submit, since it's something that we look at and count up, and if the numbers don't quite line up, we'll send it back to you and ask you to fix it. And of course, just to throw this in there again, if you have any questions while you're completing the report, if you want us to quick look it over to make sure everything makes sense, you can definitely reach out to us. And we're always happy to do that, to help out on that. So now let's take a look at item 18. So again, this is going to appear as a table in the OLDC where the columns display A through F. Column A is straightforward. This asks for what element, what element had a potential improper payment error. Column B asks what was the mid. Your responses here can be pulled from column 2 of your mid table. And let me take a step back and show you the mid table. Again, if you've been completing reviews, this probably looks familiar to you. But in column 2 of the mid tables, I'm going to kind of highlight it here. It asks for what documentation was, describe the documentation that was missing or insufficient. So whatever, when you have a completed mid table, whatever you wrote here in column 2, you can just copy and paste that over to column B for item 18. Column C is asking for the dollar amount of each potential improper payment, and this corresponds to column 3 of the mid table. Column D of item 18 corresponds to columns 4, 5, and 6 of the mid table. And let me show you quickly what I mean here. I'm going to hop on back over to show you the mid table. In the mid table, column 4 asks whether an additional inquiry can be used. And then if you say no, you describe why in column 5. And if you say yes, you describe what was done for the additional inquiry. So going back to the report, item 18, in column D, you kind of combine what you wrote in those columns in the mid tables. You would say yes or no, and then pull the rest of your response from either column 5 or 6, depending on which one you completed. Column E is the amount that was mitigated, and this corresponds to column 8 of your mid tables. And finally, column F asks you to explain how you determined whether or not the potential improper payment could be mitigated. And this is pulled from column 9 of your mid table. So let me show you a couple of examples. First, let's pretend that one of our worksheets had a potential improper payment error caused by mid in element 330. The child citizenship verification was missing, and again, that can just be pulled from what you wrote in the mid table, column 2. The potential improper payment amount was $510. In column D, yes was pulled from column 4 of the mid-table, and the description here, contacted vital records, was pulled from column 6. In column E, we'll say that the entire dollar amount of $510 was mitigated. And in F, there's a brief description that vital records provided the birth certificate, and this can be copied and pasted over from column 9 of the mid-table. One more example, I won't go through this one in detail, but I just wanted to say that in this example, it stops at column D. The potential improper payment error was not mitigated, so you can just leave E and F blank. The table in the OLDC looks similar to this one, and like I showed you with the replacement cases, there's a button that you can add additional rows, and you can also delete rows if you added something in error. So it's really similar to the replacement case item in that regard. In item 19, you're asked to identify all improper payment error causes. So for each error cause, you provide what that cause is, the number of cases that had that error cause, an example, and whether the error cause was mid or not. So in the example here, to keep things simple, I only show 3 rows. First, we'll say that the first cause was income calculation, and there were 12 cases with this error. And I give a brief example of the error cause. And again, in this example, I say all sources of income were not included. There could have been other examples that you can use here for income calculation. We just asked for one example. And this is not caused by missing or insufficient documentation. So a couple of things to keep in mind when you're completing item 19. First, make sure you're not including any potential improper payment errors that were mitigated due to additional inquiry here. Also, a couple times we've seen the same general error cause, but some are mid and some are non-mid, and we need you to separate those out into separate rows. So let me show you what I mean. Let's say need for care. In this row, you can see that there were 8 cases with an error due to need for care, such as work verification missing from the case file. So this cause is mid, missing documentation. Now let's look at the next row. The error cause here is also need for care, but for these 7 cases, the error was due to non-mid causes, such as the worker not calculating the need correctly. So again, the same general error causes need for care, but we're putting these on 2 separate rows because one is mid and one is not. Lastly, please take a look at the yellow box, the sum of column 2 here. So adding up all of these cases, this must be greater than or equal to the number of cases that you entered back in item 4 of the report. That's the item where we ask for the number of cases that had an improper payment. So like in item 18, the last item, we will do a cross-check, and if something doesn't add up right, we'll ask you to fix it. So double check that before you submit. Item 20 again asks for a list of error causes as given in 19. And here you'll give your plans for reducing those error causes. You'll describe your planned action steps, the timeline for implementing the action steps, and the method or methods you will use to measure progress and impact of the action steps. So I'll show you how this item is set up. It appears as a table like some of the previous items. The first column, where it says error, that just numbers the error causes, so 1, 2, 3, and so on. The next column, cause of error, will auto-populate based on your response to column 19. As you can see here, we had income calculation for our first error cause. Moving on to the next column, action steps. Here we ask you to share specific activities that you are planning to help reduce the error. If you have multiple action steps for an error cause, which we often see, you might want to number them. In fact, we strongly recommend that you do. That makes your response just look much cleaner. It's easier to read. It just looks, more organized. So in this example, you can see the state identified 3 specific action steps to address income calculation errors: staff training, update training manual, and create a cheat sheet on calculating income. Again, your action steps might look completely different. These are, again, just examples. In the next column, timeline, we want you to share when the action steps will be taken and when you anticipate they will be complete. If you identified multiple action steps in the previous column, then please use the same numbering to ensure that they align, as you can see in this example. So we have 3 action steps and 3 timeline items to match. Finally, in the column for progress measurement, describe how you will track both the completion of your action steps and whether they're having the desired effect in reducing the error. And again, you can use the numbering system here to make sure everything lines up. Sometimes we see that states, have the same method of measuring progress for all of their action steps. It might be just ongoing case reviews. That's perfectly fine. If you do want to get more specific in kind of matching things up to the different action steps, you can use the numbering, as I did here in this example. Just, as long as it makes sense, as long as everything kind of lines up logically, that's fine. So here's a few pointers for item 20. Many of these I already showed you in the last slide. First, we recommend using numbering for the action steps, timeline, and progress measurement. Ensure that the action steps are directly tied to error causes. Ensure the timeline and progress measurements, again, all tie back to the error cause. Be specific as you can. And finally, if any of the error causes this cycle were also error causes last cycle, think about what you might do differently this cycle to address them. All right, we got a few more items on the 404 report. I know we are getting to the end of the hour, which is why we carved out 90 minutes for this webinar. For 21A, enter the amount of improper payments that are expected to be recovered. If that amount you expect to recover is less than the amount of your overpayments, then describe your reasons limiting the collection. So when you determine the estimates for recovery, think about your history of collecting overpayments and whether there's any state laws that might limit the collection amount. In 21B, enter the amount that was collected as a result of the previous review. And if it's less than the amount that you expected to recover, describe the reasons why. So you'll probably need to refer to these items from your 2019 report to see what that expected amount was. If you don't have easy access to that report, remember you can pull it up on the OLDC, or you can let us know and we'll send it to you. Item 22 is where you'll describe your information systems and other infrastructure that assist in identifying and reducing improper payments. So here we're talking about systems that help with eligibility, that help to identify and reduce errors, or that help with the improper payment process. So you might think about eligibility systems that interface with other programs, automated systems that profile and highlight potential improper payments, that have capabilities for ongoing or ad hoc reports, eligibility worker alerts, and so on. Also, you can, in this item, describe any limitations that you have with your current technology and talk about any plans that you might have to acquire new systems or upgrade. In item 23, you'll provide findings and targets for the current cycle and the previous cycle, and also future targets for a series of error measures. And these include percentage of cases with an error, percentage of cases with an improper payment, percentage of improper payments or error rate, average amount of improper payments, and estimated annual amount of improper payments. So this is a lot of data. I think there's like 25 data points. Most of it is set up for you in the OLDC. So let me show you on the next slide. So here in this table, you can see the error measures are listed on the left. The figures for prior cycle data, prior cycle target, and current cycle target will all auto-populate based on what was entered in the 2019 report. You might want to go back and double check that everything carried over okay. I mean, you certainly don't have to. I don't think we've ever really had problems with that, but if you want to double check, you certainly can. And the data for the current cycle, which is in the middle column there, that also auto-populates based on what was entered in part 2 of the report. So if you get down there and you see it's not auto-populating, remember, click the Save button, and it should do that. So the only column where you actually have to enter new data are the targets for next cycle. And a couple of things to think about as you set your targets for next cycle. We often come back and ask for more information about how you calculated these targets, especially that one on the very bottom, the target for estimated annual amount of improper payments. This figure should be calculated by taking your error rate target, which is the middle one, the third one, and multiplying it by whatever the annual amount of payments, total annual amount of payments will be in 3 years. And we know that don't know what that's necessarily going to be in 3 years, but if you can think of a ballpark figure and then multiply that by your error rate target, again, that third one down, that should give you an idea of what that estimated annual amount of improper payment should be. So, again, if we read this report, it doesn't quite, look right, we might have questions on how you came up with it. So that might be a question that we come back with. In item 24, you'll be comparing your current cycle data to the current cycle targets, and if any were not met, describe why. Also refer to those action steps that were described in item 20 and how will they be used to address the areas where targets were not met. All right, we are very close to the end, item 25. Here you'll be thinking back to the improper payment error causes that were identified in the report from 2019. Describe the action steps that were taken, whether the action steps reduced the error causes, how progress was measured, and any barriers to the effectiveness of the action steps. And I'll show you some more on this in the next slide. So this gives you an idea of how item 25 will look in the OLDC. The first column will pre-populate based on what was entered in the previous report from 3 years ago. In the next column, you'll want to take a look at your 404 report from 2019, specifically item 17. What were your planned action steps? Were they implemented? Was progress made towards full implementation? And also include any additional actions that were taken. In the third column, you'll share whether the action steps reduced the identified errors. And you can simply say yes or no here. You can certainly say more if you like. If multiple action steps were mentioned in the previous column, make sure to include responses here for each of those steps. For the next column, how did you measure your progress in reducing the identified errors? Again, you might wish to refer to your 2019 report since your plans for measurement are included in item 17. That might be a good starting point, but if what you actually did differed from those plans, then you want to describe that here. And then in the last column, describe any barriers or setbacks in implementing the action steps. Or if you did implement things but didn't see the intended results, you can say that here as well. And if you didn't have any barriers, if everything went great, then you can just say none here under barriers. So at this point, I would like to show you a couple of other things on the OLDC. When you have entered everything, so you've made it to the end, you want to click down at the very bottom of the screen. You can see hopefully a button that says validate. And if anything comes up after you click validate, warnings or errors, I think Janae mentioned this toward the beginning of the webinar, you should address all of the things that come up, but you can still submit the report with warnings, but not with errors. You probably don't need to attach anything to your report, but if you do, you can click on this box here where it says View Add Attachments. And you also have the option here to print the report. I do not see any questions coming in at the moment, so I'm going to take a break and turn it back over to Mike to close us out, and we will stop again one more time for questions. So if you do have something, you can type it in now. Mike?
All right, I'm off mute. Sorry about that, folks. Thank you so much, Katie, for this valuable information. Thank you also to Janae for the information on the OLDC. And thanks to the Office of Child Care staff for helping us with our questions today. Really appreciate it. So let's wrap up today's webinar. As you begin to fill out your 404, both Janae and Katie mentioned it, and I'll mention it one more time. TA support is out there. There are a variety of ways we can offer support. First, error rate office hours. This is an informal session where you can drop in, ask questions. If you don't have any questions, you can still join just to listen in. We will not be presenting anything, so you don't necessarily need to be there the whole hour. You can drop in anytime during the hour-long session. Next on the list, TA can review your draft report before you submit it. In fact, we highly recommend this. If there are any issues with it, we can catch those before you submit it, and that usually means you can get it approved much faster. We also offer a just-in-time training, which is a one-on-one TA session on completing your report and entering it into OLDC. These training sessions are really whatever you want them to be. We can even hold more than one if you need it. We're glad to help in any way. Some states have used the just-in-time to work one-on-one with us on completing some of the 404 items. Other states have used the time just to navigate and familiarize themselves with the OLDC. And others have requested a just-in-time training to get some assistance on entering the items into OLDC. It's pretty informal. Again, just a time where we can help with whatever your needs are. And of course, just if you have any questions while you're completing or entering your report. So you can contact us and we're glad to help you out. Finally, you can always reach out to your regional office to request technical assistance, or you can email your error rate specialist, Katie or Janae or myself. So here are the next steps for the year 3 states. If you haven't already, make sure you get your OLDC access set up. And once you have access, please test it out to make sure everything is working okay. If not, reach out and we'll help you out. Begin working on your 404 report, and if you do want to have a just-in-time training, let us know so we can get that scheduled. And of course, submit your ACF-404 report by June 30th. Just a little over a month away, folks. At this point, two more things. We're going to stop one more time for questions. And I just want to remind you that we have a short evaluation that'll pop up at the end of the webinar. Please take just a couple minutes and complete that evaluation. It really helps us to make sure that we offer the type of webinars that you're looking for in the future. So thank you for filling that out ahead of time.
Right. Mike, we did have one more question that came in from Sheila Garceau.
Okay.
With our last report, we added some attachments because the field was not long enough. Have the field length been increased? And Sheila, I think they have. I think when we made some updates to the 404 and we worked with the OLDC, I think that we requested to make the field length longer. But like I mentioned earlier, you know, it's never a bad idea to have a Word version of the report as a backup. So if, you know, for some reason, if something like that happens again, you can always upload an attachment. So thank you for asking that. All right, I think that takes us to the end. Again, hope to see some of you join us for the Just in Time. Like Mike mentioned, it's not going, I know for some of the last Just in Times, we've done a little presentation. This time we are not doing that. We are purely there just to answer questions. But we hope to see some of you join us for that next week. All right, at this time then we are ready to wrap it up. Thank you so much all of you for joining us, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday and a great long weekend. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.